I'm James McGill. Like most Americans, I'm a self-made man.
Complete Better Call Saul is explored. Better Call Saul is a clever, darkly funny prequel to Breaking Bad that follows the chaotic rise of Jimmy McGill, an underdog lawyer with a heart, a hustle, and a flair for bending the rules. Set in Albuquerque, it shows how Jimmy transforms into the shady, fast-talking criminal attorney Saul Goodman. Along the way, we meet unforgettable characters, including tough fixer Mike Ehrmantraut and cartel players like Gus Fring and Lalo Salamanca. Packed with scams, courtroom drama, and emotional twists, the show mixes legal thrills with moral gray areas and makes you root for a guy who should know better. If you want us to stray from the cartoon zone every once in a while and bring you more such content, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more of this and a lot more of the cartoon goodness.
That is the truth. I'm a lawyer. Guys, I passed the bar.
Season 1. After Breaking Bad, we see Saul Goodman, now living under the name Gene Takovic, working quietly at a Cinnabon in Nebraska. Gene looks constantly on edge, as if he's scared the police might show up any moment. When a man starts staring at him, Gene gets really nervous, sweating and panicking, only to realize the man has nothing to do with law enforcement. Later, Gene goes home alone and watches one of his old flashy Better Call Saul commercials on TV. It brings back memories, and he gets emotional, even tearing up. Then the story jumps back in time to 2002. Jimmy McGill, who later becomes Saul Goodman, is working as a struggling public defender. One of his current cases is ridiculous. It involves 3 college kids who did something gross with a severed head. Jimmy isn't making much money and even gets annoyed when he has to pay a small parking fee. But things start looking up when a man named Craig Kettleman, a local treasurer accused of stealing $1.5 million, seems interested in hiring him. The contrast between Gene's bleak present and Jimmy's chaotic past is already clear. Gene is quiet and fearful, while Jimmy is loud, broke, and hustling. At the same time, Jimmy gets into a small car accident with 2 skateboarders, Lars and Cal, and suspects they're trying to scam him. He warns them that they picked the wrong guy to mess with, but soon the Kettlemans choose a big law firm, HHM, where Jimmy's brother Chuck is a partner instead of Jimmy to defend them. Wanting to win them back, Jimmy comes up with a plan. He tells the skateboarders to fake getting hit by Mrs. Kettleman's car so he can rescue them and impress the family. But the plan backfires when the skaters follow the wrong car and end up at the house of Tuco Salamanca and his grandmother. The skaters, clueless about what they've gotten into, keep demanding money from Tuco's sweet-looking grandmother. Tuco sees this as disrespect and beats them badly. Jimmy shows up just in time and talks to Tuco, trying to calm him down. Tuco is impressed with Jimmy's quick talking, so instead of killing the boys right away, he drags them and Jimmy out to the desert. There, Jimmy persuades Tuco to let the boys live, with only broken legs as punishment instead. Tuco agrees and breaks their legs. Jimmy then drives them to a hospital. After this horrible night, Jimmy crashes at his brother Chuck's house. The next day, Jimmy is back in court trying to make a living, still broke and frustrated. Jimmy may be in over his head, but his ability to talk his way out of danger is impressive and dangerous. In a flashback, we see Chuck once helped Jimmy get out of jail when he was younger. Jimmy was facing serious charges and could have ended up a registered sex offender. Chuck told him to grow up and stop acting foolish. Back in the present, Jimmy secretly calls the Kettlemans and warns them they're in danger of being robbed. The next day, the Kettlemans are missing. Jimmy, worried that a man named Nacho might be behind it, waits for his call at a payphone for hours. Suddenly, cops arrest Jimmy, but not because of Nacho. They take him to the courthouse, where Nacho, now in custody, warns Jimmy. If Nacho doesn't get out by the end of the day, Jimmy is dead. The stakes are rising fast. Jimmy is now caught between criminals and the law, trying to save his own neck. Jimmy starts investigating. After talking to Mike, the quiet parking guy who used to be a cop, Jimmy figures out the truth. The Kettlemans weren't kidnapped. They just ran away with the stolen money. So Jimmy hikes through the woods and finally finds them hiding. Jimmy's cleverness and instincts as a lawyer are kicking in, even if he's not always on the right side of the law. In a flashback, Jimmy is seen scamming a man by selling him a fake Rolex watch. Back in the present, after finding the Kettlemans hiding with the stolen money, Jimmy is tempted to take a bribe to keep quiet. Eventually, he gives in and takes the money. He uses it to clean himself up, get a fancy haircut, and buy a new suit. He also uses the money to put up a giant billboard for his law services. But the design looks just like the one used by HHM, his rival firm. Howard Hamlin notices and takes Jimmy to court. The judge decides that the billboard must be taken down. Not giving up, Jimmy hires some film students to shoot a dramatic video of him standing up to big law firms like HHM. During the shoot, the man taking down the billboard falls, and Jimmy heroically climbs up to save him. This whole rescue was staged by Jimmy to get attention. The plan works. Jimmy becomes a local hero and gets media coverage. Chuck, however, starts getting suspicious when Jimmy tells him he's getting more clients, but avoids showing Chuck the newspaper with the billboard story. Jimmy is starting to enjoy the fame and success, but he's clearly still relying on tricks and stunts to get ahead. Chuck, suspicious, goes outside to a neighbor's yard to find the paper himself. Someone sees him and calls the police. The cops come and Chuck ends up getting tasered and taken to the hospital. Meanwhile, Jimmy keeps trying to build his practice. One client wants to secede from the US. Another is trying to sell a talking toilet, and an elderly woman just wants help with legal papers. After a tiring day, Jimmy and Kim visit Chuck in the hospital. Chuck eventually gets released and goes home. Mike, meanwhile, is also dealing with trouble. The police show up at his house. While Jimmy's legal antics are wild, Mike's storyline is much darker and more emotional. In a flashback, we see Mike wounded from a gunshot. We learn that the injury came from a shootout with two corrupt cops, Fensky and Hoffman, who had killed Mike's son, Matt. Stacy, Mike's daughter-in-law, wants to know what really happened to Matt. Mike tells her the painful truth. Matt was hesitant to take dirty money from other cops, but Mike encouraged him to do it to stay safe. Matt finally agreed, but was then killed because his partners didn't trust him anymore. Earlier, Mike and Jimmy met with investigators looking into Fensky and Hoffman's deaths. Mike asks Jimmy to spill coffee on one of the detectives so he can steal the notepad. Jimmy says no at first, but ends up doing it anyway. Mike reads the notes to learn why the detectives are investigating. Later, he goes to Stacy's house and finally tells her everything about Matt's death. This episode shows the deep guilt Mike carries for his son's death, which adds a lot of depth to his quiet personality. Jimmy returns the notebook to the detectives, saying he found it in the parking lot. One detective, Abasi, tries to push Mike for info, but Mike stays silent. A few days later, Jimmy drops off groceries at Chuck's house and finds him standing outside. Chuck says he's trying to slowly build up a tolerance to electricity. Jimmy, now trying to practice law more seriously, shows Kim a possible office space for the two of them. But Kim gently says no. She's still loyal to HHM, where she feels she owes a lot. Back at HHM, Kim tries to convince the Kettlemans to take a plea deal and admit guilt, but they refuse and leave HHM. This makes Howard angry. The Kettlemans then call Jimmy and ask him to represent them. Jimmy doesn't want the case. Instead, he wants Kim to get the clients back. But since Jimmy had earlier accepted their bribe, they use that to force him to take the case. Jimmy's past choices keep coming back to trap him, even when he tries to do the right thing. Knowing he can't get them a better deal than Kim could, Jimmy comes up with another plan. He asks Mike to help steal back the stolen money from the Kettlemans. The next morning, Jimmy visits them and tells them their money is gone. Now that they have no way to pay for their defense, the Kettlemans return to HHM and take the plea deal. In a flashback, Jimmy is working in the mailroom at the law firm HHM. He gets exciting news. He passed the bar exam and is now officially a lawyer. Jimmy is thrilled and hopeful that he can start working at HHM as a lawyer. Chuck, though secretly against it, acts supportive and proud. But Chuck tells Howard behind the scenes that Jimmy shouldn't be hired because he took law school classes online and didn't take the proper path. During a celebration with Kim and some co-workers, Howard breaks the news to Jimmy that HHM won't be hiring him as a lawyer. Jimmy is heartbroken, but doesn't know Chuck was behind the decision. Later, while working with an elderly client, Mrs. Landry, Jimmy discovers that Sandpiper Crossing, a retirement home, is secretly overcharging its residents. He goes to the Sandpiper office and sees employees shredding important documents. Jimmy writes a legal notice on toilet paper in the bathroom and hands it to the receptionist. Jimmy's resourcefulness is impressive. Even using toilet paper to serve a legal notice shows how far he'll go for a case. He then digs the shredded documents out of the trash and brings them to Chuck's house. Chuck helps him tape the papers back together by the next morning, showing that Sandpiper was hiding billing fraud. Soon, Schweikart and his legal team visit Chuck and Jimmy to discuss the case. Chuck makes a bold move. He demands a $20 million settlement, or says they'll take Sandpiper to court. Schweikart refuses the offer. Meanwhile, Mike meets up with Caldera, the veterinarian who also acts as a fixer for illegal work. This episode shows Jimmy and Chuck working well as a team, but Chuck's true feelings are still hidden. For now, Chuck starts venturing outside more often, slowly getting comfortable with the world again. Jimmy wins an argument with Schweikart over legal strategy, proving he has real talent. But when Jimmy gets back to Chuck's house, he realizes this case is too big for just the two of them to handle. So he agrees to give the case to HHM. Late that night, Chuck secretly calls Howard and tells him not to let Jimmy work on the case. The next day, when Jimmy learns he's not being included in the team handling the lawsuit, he's furious. Kim tries to comfort him, but things only get worse when he finds out Chuck was the one who betrayed him. Jimmy is heartbroken, but still hands over the Sandpiper case to HHM, though it hurts. Jimmy feels deeply betrayed, not just professionally, but personally. Chuck's disapproval cuts deeper than Howard's rejection. Meanwhile, Daniel Wormald, aka Price, wants protection for a shady drug deal, so he hires 3 bodyguards for $500 each. But Mike knocks one guy out and scares off the other. He tells Price he'll do the job alone, but for $1,500. Price agrees, and the deal with Nacho goes smoothly. Mike explains it all worked out because he did his homework on Nacho ahead of time. Mike's calm, serious approach contrasts with Jimmy's chaotic style, but both get results. In a flashback, Jimmy tells his old friend Marco that he's leaving Chicago for good to work with Chuck in Albuquerque. Back in the present, Jimmy gives the Sandpiper case to Howard, officially stepping away from it. While hosting a bingo game, Jimmy vents his frustration to the elderly players, talking about the Chicago sunroof, a prank that ended with Jimmy in jail. Feeling lost and bitter, Jimmy drives back to Cicero to visit Marco. The Sioux start pulling scams again, just like they used to. They spend the week conning people and having fun. Jimmy is emotionally retreating to his old life, looking for comfort in familiar but shady habits. On their final scam before Jimmy plans to go home, Marco has a heart attack and dies. Jimmy is shaken and attends Marco's funeral. At the service, Kim calls to tell Jimmy there's a great job opportunity waiting for him at Davis and Maine. Jimmy returns to Albuquerque for the interview, but just before walking into the office, he pauses. He twists Marco's pinky ring on his finger, then turns around and walks away, hinting he may not be ready to stop being Slippin' Jimmy.
Let go! Let go!
Season 2. Picking up where Season 1 left off, Jimmy meets with Clifford Maine from Davis and Maine. To everyone's surprise, Jimmy turns down the job offer. Kim finds him relaxing in a hotel pool, acting like he's quitting law altogether. Inside at the bar, Jimmy tells her that he's tired of living under Chuck's shadow and wants to live his own life. To prove it, he scams a loud and rude financial guy named Ken, and Kim goes along with it. But when Jimmy suggests doing scams full-time, Kim says it can't be a regular thing. Convinced by her, Jimmy accepts the Davis and Maine job. Meanwhile, Mike refuses to help Price Daniel Wormald with another drug deal because Price drives an eye-catching yellow Hummer. Feeling confident, Price meets Nacho alone. Nacho checks Price's glove box and sees his real name and address. Later, Price's house gets robbed, and he calls the cops. Not about the drugs, but about stolen baseball cards. The cops become suspicious and think he might be a drug dealer. While looking around the house, they find a hidden compartment behind the couch, but it's empty. Jimmy is trying to find a balance between being a respectable lawyer and his Slippin' Jimmy side, while Mike's world is slowly pulling him into deeper criminal activity. Jimmy is now working on the Sandpiper case with HHM and Davis and Maine. Chuck joins a meeting, and Jimmy is thrown off, wondering why Chuck is even there. Meanwhile, Mike is working at the courthouse toll booth when Price shows up, asking where the police station is. Mike figures out the police are onto Price and offers to help retrieve his baseball cards. Mike visits Nacho at his family's upholstery shop and threatens to expose Nacho's side deals to Tuco unless Nacho cooperates. Eventually, Mike, Nacho, and Price meet in the desert. Price gives up his car in exchange for the stolen cards. Afterward, the police call Price in again for questioning. Jimmy, acting as Price's lawyer, comes up with a bizarre, fake story about Price filming fetish videos called Crybaby Squat Cobbler. He even says there's a video, though it doesn't exist. The detectives want to see the video. Jimmy goes home and tells Kim everything, including how he faked the video. Kim is uncomfortable. She realizes Jimmy crossed a line by fabricating evidence. Jimmy's lies are getting bigger, and while they solve problems in the short term, they're starting to push people like Kim away. Jimmy is assigned to bring in more clients for the Sandpiper lawsuit. He bribes a bus driver to let him talk to elderly passengers, convincing them to join the case. He gets lots of signatures, but is later accused of illegal soliciting. Jimmy denies it. When he doesn't hear back from any of the clients, he decides to secretly air a TV commercial to attract more people. The ad works, and he gets many calls. That night, Cliff Maine calls Jimmy. He's angry that Jimmy aired the commercial without approval. Jimmy doesn't tell Kim about it. Meanwhile, Mike visits Stacy, who says she hears gunshots every night. Mike sleeps in his car nearby but hears nothing. The next day, Stacy again claims she heard gunfire. Though Mike knows it didn't happen, he promises to move Stacy and his granddaughter to a safer place. Realizing he needs more money, Mike calls Caldera for another job. That night, he gets a call. It's Nacho. He wants Mike's help getting rid of Tuco Salamanca. Both Jimmy and Mike are making questionable choices. Jimmy's rule-breaking is hurting his career and relationships, while Mike is edging closer to cartel business. Mike listens to Nacho's plan to kill Tuco, but doesn't like it. Instead, Mike comes up with his own plan. He buys a gun from a dealer named Lawson, but then decides not to use it. Instead of killing Tuco, Mike lets Tuco beat him up in public so the police can arrest him. The plan works. Tuco is arrested, and Mike walks away with a swollen face and a big paycheck. Nacho wonders why Mike didn't just kill Tuco. Mike says it's better this way, no bloodshed and fewer problems. Back at Davis and Maine, Jimmy is given another chance despite the commercial incident. Meanwhile, Howard punishes Kim by demoting her to the mailroom. Jimmy is upset and goes to Chuck's house, asking him to speak up for Kim. He offers to quit being a lawyer if Chuck helps Kim get out of the mailroom. Chuck doesn't fall for it. Jimmy still tries to protect Kim, but his bad choices are partly why she's being punished. Chuck continues to act like a gatekeeper, judging Jimmy at every step. In a flashback, Jimmy is having dinner with Chuck and Chuck's wife, Rebecca. Jimmy is charming and Rebecca enjoys his company, but Chuck feels jealous and left out. In the present, Kim is still stuck doing low-level work at HHM and refuses Jimmy's help. During her lunch breaks, she calls old clients, trying to earn her way back through hard work. Eventually, she lands Mesa Verde, a major new client. When Kim tells Howard, he's happy but still says she has to stay in the mailroom. Kim stays late at the office that night and ends up seeing Chuck arrive in the morning. The two talk. Chuck says she has real potential and deserves better. As a result, she's finally taken out of the mailroom. Meanwhile, Mike is sitting at Loyola's when Hector Salamanca shows up. Hector wants Mike to tell the police that the gun Tuco had didn't belong to him, which would reduce Tuco's sentence. Kim proves her worth through hard work. While Mike is now being pulled into direct contact with the Salamancas, things are escalating fast. Mike is at home when Arturo, one of Hector Salamanca's men, shows up at his door. He tells Mike they want an answer about whether he'll change his story to help Tuco. Mike politely says no. Later, two more of Hector's men break into Mike's house to intimidate him, but Mike quickly chases them off. Hector isn't done yet. He sends the cousins, Lionel and Marco Salamanca, to scare Mike while he's at a motel with his granddaughter, Kaylee. The cousins say nothing, but their presence is clearly a threat. Feeling furious and protective, Mike agrees to meet Hector in person. They sit down at El Griego Guiñador, and Mike demands $50,000 in exchange for changing his statement. Hector finally agrees to pay. Meanwhile, Howard is frustrated with Chuck over how he handled the situation with Kim. So, he punishes Kim by making her argue meaningless legal motions in the Sandpiper case, cases she's sure to lose. While doing one of these, Richard Schweikart notices her talent and confusion and asks her to lunch. At lunch, Kim seems unsure and later calls Jimmy from the same restaurant. They pull a quick scam on a sleazy businessman sitting nearby. The next morning, Kim and Jimmy talk about where their careers are heading. Both admit they're unhappy where they are and want something different. Kim is starting to see that there are other, better paths for her legal future. In a flashback, we see young Jimmy working at his dad's small store. A con artist comes in and tricks Jimmy's dad with a fake sob story. The man tells Jimmy that the world is full of wolves and sheep and you don't want to be the sheep. Jimmy listens, and when his dad steps out, he steals money from the register. In the present, Mike hires Jimmy to represent him legally in Tuco's case. Jimmy tells the prosecutor that the gun Tuco had wasn't his, and although the DA doesn't believe him, there's no solid proof to fight it. Back at Davis in Maine, Jimmy is tired of playing by the rules. He starts acting out, trying to get fired instead of quitting. He changes the company letterhead, drinks openly, and even plays bagpipes loudly in his office. Finally, Cliff Maine has had enough and fires Jimmy. Meanwhile, Kim submits her resignation letter to HHM. After quitting, she gets interviewed at Schweikart & Coakley for a possible job. Later that day, she visits Jimmy and tells him she has a better idea. They should start their law firm, working side by side, but each with their own clients. Jimmy is once again choosing chaos, but Kim is beginning to take charge of her future on her own terms. Kim officially quits HHM and wastes no time. She contacts Mesa Verde, her biggest client, and arranges a meeting. She meets Jimmy in their new office space and proudly tells him she kicked ass during the meeting. But HHM isn't letting go of Mesa Verde without a fight. They set up a final pitch meeting, and Chuck decides to personally attend to try to win them back. At the meeting, Chuck praises Kim's work, but argues that Mesa Verde is too big for one person to handle. His argument works. Mesa Verde decides to go with HHM. After the meeting, Chuck collapses from the stress and exposure to light and has to be carried out by Howard. Meanwhile, Jimmy is filming a new commercial at a military base using some of his old scam-style tricks and a small crew. When he gets back to the office, he finds out Kim has lost Mesa Verde to HHM, and she's clearly upset. That night, Jimmy visits Chuck, who is in rough shape and barely conscious. Sensing an opportunity, Jimmy steals Mesa Verde's documents. He then goes to a local print shop and spends all night making small changes to the paperwork, intending to sabotage Chuck. At the same time, Mike is watching the Regalo Helado ice cream truck, driven by cartel associate Ximenez Lecerda. Later, Mike uses a garden hose. In Kaylee's help to set up a clever trap, he punches holes in the hose, and once she's gone, fills the holes with iron nails, creating a homemade spike strip. Jimmy is taking bold, unethical steps to help Kim, and Mike is planning something major against the cartel. Both are on dangerous paths, relying on tricks and sabotage. Mike finally puts his plan into action using the garden hose filled with nails. He lays it out on the road, and the cartel's ice cream truck, driven by Ximenez Lecerda, runs over it, blowing out its cheese. Mike hides and waits quietly, making sure Ximenez doesn't see or hear him. When the coast is clear, Mike sneaks over to the truck and steals $250,000 hidden in the tires. Later, he meets with Nacho and learns that the robbery didn't make the news. That's because a kind stranger helped Ximenez. But unfortunately, Hector Salamanca found out and killed the man. This upsets Mike. He never intended for anyone to get hurt. Meanwhile, Chuck goes to court to argue for Mesa Verde, but during the hearing, he completely messes up the case. He brings the wrong documents, gets confused, and embarrasses himself. Afterward, he goes home in shame and starts putting the pieces together. He realizes that Jimmy must have sabotaged his documents. At the same time, Kim and Jimmy are setting up their new law office together. Kim gets a call from Mesa Verde. They want her to be their lawyer again, thanks to Chuck's mistake. Ernesto, Chuck's assistant, calls Jimmy and Kim, asking them to come to Chuck's house. When they arrive, Chuck tells them what he believes happened. Jimmy altered the documents. Kim defends Jimmy and acts like she doesn't believe Chuck's theory. But when they leave and get in the car, Kim punches Jimmy, proving she does believe Chuck and is angry that Jimmy lied. Jimmy's trick worked, but it came at a cost. Chuck is humiliated, and Kim knows the truth, even if she covers for Jimmy. A few days later, Jimmy is back to filming a commercial, this time at a local elementary school. That night, he returned to the copy shop where he forged the documents. He offers the clerk, Lance, a bribe to say he never saw Jimmy there. But Chuck is still on the case. He arrives at the shop later to question Lance himself. Chuck gets very worked up during the visit. He collapses, hits his head, and passes out. Outside the shop, Jimmy is watching everything unfold. He looks panicked, praying someone calls 911. In a flashback, we see Chuck at their mother's hospital bedside. She wakes up briefly and calls out for Jimmy, not Chuck. But Chuck never tells Jimmy this, clearly holding in feelings of jealousy. Back in the present, Ernesto, who likes Jimmy, lies to Chuck. He says he was the one who told Jimmy to go to the print shop trying to protect him. Meanwhile, Mike has a new plan. He buys a sniper rifle and sets up a shot to kill Hector Salamanca. But Nacho is not on board with this. Just before Mike can take the shot, Nacho walks into the scene, blocking his view. Then, Mike hears his car horn going off in the distance. He rushes to it and finds a note on the windshield. It says only one word: don't. This rattles Mike. Someone knows exactly what he was planning. Elsewhere, Jimmy gets a call from Howard telling him Chuck's mental state has gotten worse. Jimmy visits Chuck and finds the walls of his house completely lined with metal. Jimmy, feeling bad and guilty, decides to come clean. He confesses everything. Yes, he changed the documents, and yes, he did it for Kim. What Jimmy doesn't know is that Chuck is secretly recording the entire conversation. Mike is shaken up by a mysterious warning, and Jimmy walks straight into a trap set by Chuck. Both men's secrets are starting to catch up with them. Season 3. In a flash forward, Gene is on his lunch break at the mall when he spots a shoplifter hiding in a photo booth. He tells security where the boy is, but then suddenly shouts, "Get a lawyer!" before walking away, clearly shaken. Back at work, Gene feels overwhelmed and faints from stress. Back in 2002, Jimmy is helping Chuck take down the foil from the walls in his house. They talk about a children's book they used to read, but Chuck warns Jimmy that he will pay for the fraud that embarrassed him. Chuck plays the secret recording of Jimmy's confession for Howard. Howard says the tape can't be used legally, but Chuck insists it still has value. Later, Chuck asks Ernesto to change the batteries in the recorder. Ernesto accidentally hears part of the confession, but Chuck makes him promise to stay quiet. Meanwhile, Mike is trying to figure out who stopped him from killing Hector. He takes apart his car and finds a tracker hidden in the gas cap. He discovers a similar one in his other car too. Mike buys his own tracker and replaces the one in his car with it. He drains the battery from the old tracker so it appears dead. That night, he watches as someone sneaks in and replaces the tracker. But now the person has picked up the tracker Mike installed, allowing Mike to follow them in return. Chuck's revenge is starting to unfold. Mike, meanwhile, is turning the tables on his unknown stalkers. Chuck hires a private investigator to help with his plan. The people who replaced Mike's tracker meet a courier, and Mike secretly follows that courier to Los Pollos Hermanos. Mike asks Jimmy to go inside and watch the man. Jimmy sees nothing suspicious and reports back to Mike, who's watching from the car. Gus Fring quietly observes the entire thing from a distance. Eventually, Mike sees the man leave and follows the moving tracker signal. He finds the tracker, his gas cap, and a ringing phone left in the middle of nowhere. Mike answers the call. Elsewhere, Ernesto tells Kim about the recording. Kim quickly acts. She gets Jimmy to officially hire her as his lawyer so that they are protected under attorney-client privilege. Kim advises Jimmy not to react. She says Chuck probably has a plan, and it's best to wait. But Jimmy can't help himself. He storms into Chuck's house and smashes the tape recorder with a log from the fireplace. Then Howard and the private investigator reveal themselves. They say they witnessed Jimmy committing crimes, and now Chuck can report him to the police. Chuck's trap works, and Jimmy walks right into it. Meanwhile, Gus makes his quiet entrance, and Mike is getting closer to the big cartel players. Gus meets with Mike and offers a deal. He will stop following Mike, and in return, Mike won't kill Hector. Mike agrees, but he continues working to hurt Hector's operations. Mike gets a little cocaine from a doctor and hides it inside a sneaker. He hangs the shoes over a wire where Hector's men usually hide their guns before crossing into Mexico. After they drop off the guns, Mike shoots the sneaker so the cocaine spills onto Hector's truck. At the border, drug-sniffing dogs find the cocaine and arrest Hector's drivers. Meanwhile, Jimmy is arrested for breaking into Chuck's house. He pleads not guilty and is released on bail. The prosecutor tells Chuck she's going to push hard for jail time, but Chuck suggests a better plan than jail. Jimmy tells Kim that Chuck wants him to confess and go on probation. That way, he could avoid jail and even clear his record, but he has to send his confession to the Bar Association. That could mean being disbarred. Kim urges Jimmy to fight back, and Jimmy agrees to let her help. Gus is quietly undermining Hector's empire, and Jimmy is now facing something worse than jail, losing his license to practice law. In a flashback, Hector brings money to Don Eladio, the cartel boss, but is embarrassed when Gus sends a much bigger payment through Juan Bolsa. Back in 2002, Hector demands that Gus use his trucks for smuggling. Gus pretends to agree, though he's really just playing along with his long-term plan. Gus pays Mike for the work he did sabotaging Hector, but Mike refuses to take the money. Later, Jimmy hires Mike to pretend to fix Chuck's door. While there, Mike takes pictures of Chuck's strange living situation for use in court. Gus tells Mike he's interested in hiring him officially. Mike says he'll think about it. Then Jimmy, Kim, Chuck, Howard, and the prosecutor all meet to finalize Jimmy's confession. Jimmy agrees to let the Bar Association review it. Afterward, Kim confronts Chuck. She guesses that Chuck still has another copy of the tape, and Chuck confirms it. He plans to use it at the hearing. Kim tells Jimmy that she got Chuck to admit to having a second tape. That was all part of their plan. Gus is quietly making big moves. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Kim are getting ready to turn Chuck's own evidence against him. In a flashback, Chuck tries to win back Rebecca, his ex-wife. He hosts a dinner with Jimmy and pretends his illness is gone. When she uses her phone, Chuck slaps it out of her hand. He won't explain himself, and makes Jimmy promise not to either. Rebecca storms out, hurt and confused. In 2003, the courtroom is prepared for Chuck's testimony. No electronics, no lights, all to accommodate his condition. Jimmy asks Rebecca to come, hoping her presence will affect Chuck. But Chuck thinks it's a trap. During the bar hearing, Jimmy begins questioning Chuck about how close electronic devices need to be before his illness kicks in. Chuck suspects something's off and correctly guesses that Jimmy is carrying his phone. Then Jimmy drops the real bombshell. Huel planted a fully charged battery in Chuck's pocket more than an hour ago, and Chuck didn't even feel it. Everyone in the room is stunned. Chuck tries to defend himself, saying he's not crazy, but then he snaps. He rants about Jimmy, calling him a fraud and a criminal, and saying he never deserved to be a lawyer. His furious outburst leaves the whole room in shocked silence. Jimmy pulls off a brilliant legal trick that exposes Chuck's mental illness and destroys his credibility in public. Hector forces Nacho to beat Domingo for underpaying, which leaves Nacho feeling disgusted and fed up. The Bar Association reaches a verdict. Jimmy is suspended for 1 year but is not disbarred. He's relieved and celebrates with Kim. Later, Rebecca shows up and asks Jimmy to talk to Chuck, who's refusing to answer his door. Jimmy refuses. Howard visits Chuck and urges him to let go of his anger and move forward. Chuck pretends to agree. Nacho and Arturo go to pick up drugs from Gus's warehouse. Nacho tries to take more than he's supposed to, but Tyrus calls Gus. Gus allows it, and he seems to be watching how Nacho behaves. Meanwhile, he is scouting a new laundry facility with Lydia. This will later become the Super Lab. Hector tells Nacho that he wants to use Nacho's father's business as a front. Nacho strongly disagrees. Later, Hector hears that Tuco's prison sentence has been extended due to a fight. He becomes angry and suffers a heart attack. As he struggles, Hector drops a pill, one of his heart meds, and Nacho secretly steals it. Jimmy, now unable to practice law, tries not to waste the TV commercial airtime he already paid for. So he begins promoting ads for other small businesses using a new name, Saul Goodman. The fall of Jimmy McGill and the rise of Saul Goodman is now underway. While Nacho is stepping into dangerous territory in the cartel world, Jimmy is struggling to sell off the TV commercial time he prepaid for. Meanwhile, Nacho approaches Daniel, also known as Price, and shows him a pill bottle he secretly took from Hector Salamanca. He asks Daniel to help him get empty capsules that look exactly like Hector's nitroglycerin pills. Paige, who works with Mesa Verde, celebrates Chuck's professional collapse and compliments Kim's cross-examination at the hearing. But Kim doesn't feel good about it. She regrets the role she played in Chuck's downfall. Elsewhere, Mike is helping build a church playground and even gets assistance from other members of Stacy's support group. Daniel asks Mike to accompany him to a meeting with Nacho, hoping for protection. Mike refuses at first, but after listening to Anita, a woman in the group, talk about her husband disappearing during a hike, he changes his mind. Her story seems to deeply affect Mike, reminding him of loss and responsibility. So Mike decides to go with Daniel to the meeting after all. At the meeting, Nacho reveals his plan. He wants to swap Hector's heart medication with ibuprofen to cause a heart attack. He hopes it'll look natural and not arouse suspicion. Mike listens carefully and tells Nacho that if Hector dies, he needs to switch the fake pills back with the real ones right away. That way, if anyone investigates, they'll just think Hector had a natural medical issue. Around this time, Jimmy tries to get a refund for his malpractice insurance, claiming he won't need it while suspended. But his real goal is to make the insurance agents worry about Chuck's mental condition. He fakes distress and plants the idea that Chuck is unwell, hoping it affects HHM's future premiums and credibility. While Nacho is risking everything in a deadly game, Jimmy continues using lies and manipulation as tools, even targeting his own brother's reputation to score a win. In a flashback, Jimmy and Marco revisit the abandoned McGill family store in Cicero. They find Jimmy's old coin collection and choose one for a future scam. Marco talks fondly about Jimmy's parents, but Jimmy calls his dad too trusting, a soft touch. Back in 2003, Chuck takes his doctor's advice seriously and starts facing his fears. He ventures outside and even shops on his own. Meanwhile, Jimmy has new problems. 2 of his commercial clients aren't paying him. To fix this, he fakes an accident to guilt them into settling their bills. He makes enough money to cover his share of rent. One day at lunch, Kim runs into Howard and tries to pay off her law school debt. Howard declines, refusing the money without giving her a chance to explain. Jimmy's still doing community service, but he fakes a back injury to get credit for hours he didn't work. He even makes $700 from a drug dealer by helping him leave early too. Meanwhile, Nacho goes through with his plan. He swaps Hector's real pills with ibuprofen. Mike finds the body of the Good Samaritan Hector had killed and anonymously reports it to the police. Gus Fring then steps in and agrees to help Mike launder the rest of the $250,000 he stole from Hector. He does this by giving Mike a fake job with Madrigal Electromotive, so the cash looks like legitimate income. Everyone is operating under false pretenses: Jimmy, Nacho, and Mike. They're surviving, but each deception tightens the knot around their futures. Jimmy talks to Irene Landry, the lead plaintiff in the Sandpiper case, and learns there's a large settlement offer on the table. But HHM and Davis and Maine don't want to take it. They think they can squeeze more money out by waiting. Jimmy confronts Howard, who confirms the plan to delay. Meanwhile, Chuck and Howard meet with an insurance agent who warns them about skyrocketing premiums. He says unless another lawyer supervises Chuck, their costs will rise drastically. Chuck refuses to accept being supervised. In response, Howard threatens to force Chuck into retirement. Chuck retaliates by suing HHM for $8 million, claiming it's the value of his partnership. Elsewhere, Mike becomes an official security consultant for Madrigal. This arrangement allows him to launder his stolen cartel money as legal income. Jimmy, still suspended from law practice, is struggling financially. Kim takes on extra clients to make up for it and becomes seriously overworked. Nacho tells his father the truth, that he's working with dangerous men like Hector. He begs his dad to cooperate so he can stay safe, but his father kicks him out in disgust. Seeing that Sandpiper's settlement would bring him more than $1 million, Jimmy becomes desperate. He manipulates Irene into thinking her friends want her to take the deal, even though they don't. Feeling pressured, she accepts the settlement. Jimmy gets what he wants, but at a personal cost. He has destroyed Irene's trust and alienated her from her friends. Meanwhile, Kim, burned out and driving to a meeting, falls asleep at the wheel. Her car crashes into a large rock. Jimmy gets the payday he's been chasing, but it's hollow. He hurts an innocent woman to get it. And Kim's crash is a literal wake-up call that their current path is unsustainable. In a flashback, young Jimmy listens as Chuck reads to him by lantern light, a moment that shows the bond they once had. Back in 2003, Kim recovers from her car crash with a broken arm. To help her financially, Jimmy agrees to end their office lease so she can work from home and save money. Meanwhile, at HHM, Chuck is officially pushed out when Howard personally pays the first part of Chuck's $8 million buyout. On the cartel side, Hector Salamanca offers a bribe to Manuel, Nacho's father, to use his upholstery shop as a front for drug operations. Manuel, disturbed by the offer, doesn't want any part of it, but it's clear he doesn't have a real choice. Nacho secretly plans to ambush Hector, but instead ends up stuck at a tense meeting with Hector, Gus Fring, and Juan Bolsa. Bolsa tells Hector that Don Eladio has made a decision. Salamanca's drugs will now be smuggled in Gus's trucks permanently. Hector becomes furious, and during the confrontation, he suffers a major stroke. Nacho immediately switches out Hector's fake ibuprofen pills with the real nitroglycerin ones to make it look like nothing suspicious happened. Gus, however, silently observes all of this and clearly suspects that Nacho had something to do with it. Jimmy, still reeling from his suspension, tries to make peace with Chuck, but Chuck coldly shuts him down, saying he never really mattered that much. Trying to do at least one good thing, Jimmy works to fix the damage he caused to Irene and her retirement community friends. He stages a moment where the women overhear him admitting that he manipulated Irene into accepting the Sandpiper settlement. This helps clear Irene's name and restores her friendships. But Jimmy loses his chance at over $1 million. Chuck, now without his law firm, becomes more unstable. His fear of electricity returns worse than ever. He begins tearing apart his home, ripping out walls, wiring, and appliances. Finally, alone and broken, Chuck tips over a gas lantern and sets his house on fire, killing himself. This chapter of the story ends with deep emotional and moral consequences. Chuck's death marks the end of the long, bitter struggle between two brothers, one rigidly principled, the other endlessly improvising. Jimmy's moment of self-sacrifice for Irene shows a sliver of conscience, but it's too late to save his relationship with Chuck or his soul entirely. Everyone in this story is left damaged by pride, deception, and choices that can't be undone. In the present-day Omaha timeline, Gene, Jimmy's future identity, is taken to the hospital after fainting at Cinnabon. The doctors say he's fine and ready to go, but at the front desk, the nurse has trouble entering his fake identity details into the system, which makes Gene panic inside. He's scared that his real identity will be exposed. Fortunately, it turns out to be a simple typo. Once corrected, he's allowed to leave without further questions. Still feeling paranoid, Gene tries to take a taxi back to the mall, but he notices that the cab has an Albuquerque Isotopes air freshener hanging from the mirror, a possible hint that the driver is from his old life. Even worse, the cabbie keeps staring at him and doesn't move when the light turns green. Gene becomes so uneasy that he asks to be let out early. He walks into a neighborhood, pretending to tie his shoe, and notices the cab hasn't driven away, it's just sitting there. The tension in Gene's life is building. Even the smallest reminder of his past fills him with dread. His paranoia is growing and possibly justified. Back in 2003, Jimmy is looking for jobs while staying at Kim's place. Howard calls and tells him that Chuck's house burned down. When Jimmy gets there, he finds out Chuck didn't make it. He died in the fire, likely caused by the lantern he knocked over. Jimmy is shaken and unusually quiet. Later, Howard tells him that he feels responsible for Chuck's death because he forced him out of HHM. Jimmy doesn't say much in response. Meanwhile, after Hector suffers a stroke, Gus and Nacho watch him being taken away in an ambulance. They meet with Bolsa and Arturo. Bolsa tells them they'll keep control of their territory even though Hector is now out of commission. After that, Nacho dumps the fake pills into a river, thinking he's safe, but Victor is secretly watching him. Elsewhere, Mike breaks into a Madrigal warehouse after stealing an ID badge from one of its workers. Inside, he points out many flaws in their security system and tells the manager to get in touch with Lydia. When asked who he is, Mike calmly says he's their new security consultant. Everyone is trying to cover their tracks: Jimmy, Nacho, Mike. But as we see with Victor spying, nothing in this world stays secret for long. Gus brings in Dr. Barry Goodman and Victor to check on Hector. Barry says the hospital is doing okay, but Hector needs care from somewhere like Johns Hopkins. Gus pays for a top doctor from Johns Hopkins to come and take over Hector's care. Meanwhile, Lydia sets up a meeting with Mike. She warns him that his break-in at Madrigal might expose both of them, but Mike fires back, saying she should worry about herself too. Lydia calls Gus to complain about Mike, but Gus isn't interested. He hangs up on her. Then, Tyrus gives Gus Hector's updated medical report. Gus immediately spots something suspicious in the charts and tells Tyrus to go see Victor. Tyrus and Victor meet Nacho and Arturo for another drug pickup. Nacho negotiates to take 6 packages instead of 5, and as they leave, they're suddenly ambushed by Gus and his men. Arturo is suffocated with a plastic bag right in front of Nacho. Gus tells Nacho that he knows about the pill swap, and now Nacho belongs to him. At the same time, Nacho had just told his father he wanted to leave the drug life behind. That now seems impossible. Gus is now fully aware of Nacho's secret move. Arturo's death is a brutal warning. Gus plays for keeps, and Nacho is trapped deeper than ever. Jimmy continues to look for work. He goes to Neff Copiers and impresses them with his copier knowledge during the interview. They offer him the job on the spot, but instead of being happy, Jimmy gets upset that they didn't do a background check on him. He turns down the offer and walks out. Later, Jimmy goes home and sees Kim. She doesn't tell him about the letter from Chuck or that he's been cut out of the will. The next morning, Jimmy checks the value of a fancy Hummel figurine he saw at Neff Copiers. Then, he calls Mike and leaves him a message about a potential job. Jimmy is slipping again. His bitterness is rising and his moral compass is fading fast. With Chuck gone, there's even less holding him back from returning to Slippin' Jimmy. Jimmy goes ahead with his plan to steal the expensive Hummel figurine. He first talks to Mike about it, but Mike turns him down. So Jimmy contacts Caldera to find someone willing to do the job. Caldera says no one is interested, so Jimmy takes matters into his own hands and steals Caldera's phone. He finally connects with Ira, who agrees to take the job. That night, Ira sneaks into Neff Copiers, switches the Hummel with a cheaper one, but realizes the owner, Mr. Neff, is still in the office. Ira hides under a desk and calls Jimmy for help. Jimmy comes to the rescue by letting Neff's car roll down a parking ramp, forcing Neff to chase it. Ira gets away safely. The next day, Kim returns to work at Mesa Verde. She starts feeling overwhelmed when she sees how fast the bank is expanding. She passes on more work to her new paralegal, Viola. Later that evening, Kim finally gives Jimmy the sealed letter Chuck left him. Jimmy reads it out loud, saying nice things Chuck wrote about him, which makes Kim tear up. Meanwhile, Tyrus and Victor try to cover up Arturo's murder. They fake a shootout in the desert to make it look like he was killed in a gang attack. To make it more convincing, Tyrus shoots Nacho in the gut and leaves him injured. The cousins arrive and take Nacho to Caldera, who stitches him up. Caldera warns Nacho not to involve him again. Jimmy's con game continues to grow while Kim and Nacho face increasing pressure in their own worlds. Trust is a fragile thing for everyone in this episode. Gus is told about Arturo and Nacho's attack by Juan Bolsa. Bolsa tells Gus to find drug suppliers north of the border, even if it goes against Don Eladio's rules. After the call, Gus visits Gail Butticher in a college lab. Gail shows Gus some crystal meth samples, saying they're poorly made and offers to help. Gus says no for now. Gus sends Nacho with the cousins to scout out the Espinosa gang. The cousins go in alone and kill over 20 people. Nacho, still in pain from his gunshot wound, joins them to prove himself. After the raid, Nacho realizes Gus planned it all to take control of Espinosa's territory. At a support group meeting, Stacy tells everyone she went a whole morning without thinking about her dead husband. Mike reacts badly and accuses another man of lying. Later, Mike gets a call while working security at the warehouse. He meets Gus at the factory farm, realizing he has a job for him. Meanwhile, Jimmy starts his new job at CC Mobile. Business is painfully slow. Bored, he drives off and meets Ira, who gives him the money for the Hummel figure. Jimmy says he wants to work with Ira again. Ira also gives him the idea to sell private phones. Back at the store, Jimmy paints "Is the man listening? Privacy sold here" on the windows. Kim, exhausted from Mesa Verde, decides to watch criminal court cases for a change of pace. A judge notices her and tells her to stop wasting time. Jimmy turns one scam into a business idea, while Mike and Nacho are pulled deeper into Gus's complex and deadly plans. In a flash forward to the Breaking Bad era, Saul Goodman is seen quickly packing his office with Francesca. He pays her cash to stay quiet and calls Ed the Disappearer. Back in 2003, Jimmy is still at CC Mobile. He finally gets a customer by convincing him the phones will help avoid IRS trouble. Jimmy sells a whole stack and then goes to the doghouse to sell more. Things go well until 3 kids mug him and steal all the money. He comes home shaken and tells Kim he'll see the therapist she recommended. But the next day, in the courthouse bathroom, Jimmy runs into Howard. Seeing how Howard is still grieving Chuck, Jimmy decides not to follow his path. He throws the therapist's business card away. Meanwhile, Kim continues balancing Mesa Verde with her public defender work. When a Mesa Verde issue comes up, she ignores it and later promises it won't happen again. Mike is busy evaluating engineers for Gus's underground lab project. The first one fails the test. The second candidate, Werner Ziegler, impresses Mike. Gus agrees to bring him on board. Jimmy moves from grief into hustle mode, while Mike and Gus take serious steps toward building the future meth empire. In a flashback, Jimmy and Kim are seen working together in HHM's mailroom. Kim impresses Chuck with her legal knowledge. In the present, Kim juggles her work at Mesa Verde with her criminal defense cases. Jimmy struggles financially and emotionally during his suspension. Kim joins Schweikart and Coakley so she can balance both kinds of legal work. This hurts Jimmy, as it means that the dream of Wexler McGill is over. Jimmy learns that Geraldine, his first elder law client, has died. He mourns her more than Chuck. He tries to motivate a depressed Howard with some harsh words. Using the $5,000 inheritance from Chuck, Jimmy buys burner phones to resell. When the 3 teens who mugged him show up again, Jimmy scares them off. Meanwhile, Mike secretly builds living quarters for Werner's crew inside the warehouse. The lab construction starts. Gus visits Hector in the hospital. He tells Hector a childhood story about trapping a coati that ate fruit from his tree. Instead of killing it, he let it suffer slowly. Gus hints that he plans to do the same to Hector. Jimmy fully leans into his con man persona, while Gus's long game for revenge becomes chillingly clear. Kim gets all the lawyers at Schweikart and Coakley involved in Hewell's case. She plans to overwhelm prosecutor Suzanne Erickson with tons of paperwork. Meanwhile, Jimmy rides a bus and uses different pens and papers to write fake letters in support of Hewell. He even convinces other passengers to write letters too. These letters are mailed using fake return addresses from Coushatta, Louisiana, Hewell's hometown. Suzanne starts looking into this support, but finds it all seems legitimate. Jimmy even creates a fake church website and buys prepaid phones. When Suzanne calls those phones, Jimmy and his camera crew answer, pretending to be church members. Faced with what looks like real community pressure, Suzanne offers a plea deal. This means Huel doesn't have to go to jail. Kim is thrilled and tells Jimmy she enjoyed bending the rules like that and wants to do more. Meanwhile, Mike takes Werner and his team to a strip club for a night out. Kai causes a small fight, but the bigger issue is Werner. He gets drunk and talks too much about their secret underground project to strangers. Back in the drug world, Nacho is fully recovered and now has more control in the Salamanca group. He starts training Domingo, aka Crazy 8, to deal with low-performing dealers. Then Lalo Salamanca shows up to help run things. Lalo is very different from Hector. He cares about the small details of the business, which makes Nacho uneasy. At home, Nacho keeps a secret safe with stacks of cash and fake Canadian IDs, clearly planning for a possible escape with his dad. Jimmy and Kim's scam shows how far they're willing to go when they're in sync. But behind the success, Nacho and Werner's stories hint at danger and unraveling trust. Jimmy and Kim secretly swap out the approved blueprints for a Mesa Verde bank branch in Lubbock, Texas. They plan to trick everyone into building a bigger branch than was originally approved. Meanwhile, Jimmy goes to his hearing to get his law license back. He answers all the questions correctly and sounds professional. But surprisingly, his application is rejected. One of the panel members says it's because Jimmy seemed fake, like he wasn't being sincere. When Jimmy tells Kim what happened, she figures out the problem. He never mentioned Chuck. Since his suspension was connected to Chuck, the panel expected Jimmy to show some emotion or reflection about his brother. Instead of accepting the advice, Jimmy gets angry. He accuses Kim of only being with him when she needs something and suggests she's just slumming it with him. Kim fires back that she's always had his back, but he's the one who sabotages himself. That night, Jimmy starts packing to move out, but Kim stops him. Rather than breaking up, she offers to help him win reinstatement. Meanwhile, Lalo visits Hector in the hospital. He gives Hector a special bell so he can communicate. It's the same bell from a time Hector killed a man and burned down his hotel. Lalo thanks Gus for paying Hector's hospital bills, but he's clearly keeping an eye on everything. He also asks Nacho to show him where the Salamancas get their drugs after Gus's trucks deliver them from Mexico. Werner's construction crew finishes blasting through the rock that was in the way of the elevator shaft. They celebrate because the hard part of the job is almost done. But Werner is lonely and misses his wife deeply. So, without telling anyone, he decides to run away. Jimmy's refusal to acknowledge Chuck shows he still hasn't faced his guilt. At the same time, Werner's escape and Lalo's arrival signal major trouble ahead for both Mike and Gus. In a flashback, Chuck pretends to be happy on the day Jimmy officially becomes a lawyer, though deep down he isn't. In 2004, Kim helps Jimmy with his appeal by setting up moments in public where Jimmy acts like he's grieving his brother Chuck. Meanwhile, Lalo secretly watches Gus's drug business and starts to understand how things run. Werner tries to secretly meet up with his wife, but Lalo tricks him during a phone call and gets him to talk about the underground lab they're building. Mike realizes Werner has become a risk, and although he doesn't want to, he agrees to kill him. Werner calls his wife at the airport to tell her not to come, and then Mike ends Werner's life. Gus shows the mostly finished lab to Gale, but Gale says he won't help finish it until Lalo is out of the picture. Jimmy helps interview students for Chuck's scholarship. He feels a connection with one girl who got caught shoplifting in the past. The other judges reject her, but Jimmy pulls her aside and tells her people like them don't get second chances, so she has to do whatever it takes to succeed. At his hearing, Jimmy gives a speech about wanting to make the McGill name proud. The speech feels real and heartfelt, so his appeal is granted. He's allowed to practice law again. Kim is moved and proud of him until Jimmy tells her it was all an act and he never meant a word of it. He also tells her he won't use the McGill name anymore and is now going to be known as Saul Goodman. Kim is left speechless. Jimmy's transformation into Saul Goodman is now complete, but the cost is clear. He's lost another part of his true self and shocked the one person who stood by him. Season 5. This season begins in the future. A cab driver confronts Gene, hinting that he knows Gene's real identity from his past life. Shaken, Gene calls Ed the Disappearer, the man who helps people vanish, but decides to deal with the problem on his own instead. Back in 2004, Jimmy tells Kim that using the name Saul Goodman helped him attract clients for his burner phone business, and now he wants to use that name full-time for his criminal law practice. Meanwhile, Nacho tells Gus that people say the cocaine he's supplying the Salamancas isn't pure, and Lalo confirms it. To cover things up, Gus lies to Lalo and Juan Bolsa. He says Werner was building a chiller at at the chicken farm, but ran off with some cocaine, which Gus replaced with cheaper, local meth. Lalo seems to believe the story, but remains suspicious. Saul begins promoting his new legal practice by handing out the rest of his burner phones to criminals. Gus halts the lab's construction because Lalo is watching too closely, and Mike sends Werner's construction crew back home. Mike, still upset over having to kill Werner, refuses to take any money from Gus, while the project is on hold. Jimmy, now fully operating as Saul Goodman, gets his camera crew to fake a heated argument with Deputy DA Oakley to generate publicity. The stunt works well. Meanwhile, Kim has a client who refuses to take a very good plea deal. Jimmy offers to help trick the guy into changing his mind, but Kim refuses. However, after Jimmy leaves, Kim does exactly what he suggested. She cons her own client into accepting the deal. We can now see how both Jimmy and Kim are slipping into murky moral territory. Even Kim, who used to stick to the rules, is beginning to cross lines. Gus wants Nacho to spy on Lalo and report what he's planning. Meanwhile, two guys who got Saul's 50% off legal discount card go on a wild drug binge. They try to buy more cocaine from the Salamanca stash house, but the bag of drugs gets stuck in the drain pipe. Domingo, who's working at the house, tries to fix the problem, but as the bag finally drops, the police show up. It's a disaster. Nacho earns Lalo's trust by risking his life to sneak over rooftops and retrieve the drugs before the police storm in. Mike is still in a dark place emotionally because of Werner's death. He drinks a lot and even snaps at his granddaughter Kaylee when she brings up questions about her dad. Meanwhile, Jimmy tries to get back on good terms with Kim. She says she appreciated his help with her difficult client, but doesn't want to win by lying. Still, Jimmy throws himself into his Saul Goodman persona. He charms everyone at court and gets great deals for his clients. He even pulls a clever trick where he traps himself in an elevator with a DA and negotiates more plea deals during the delay. Howard invites Jimmy to lunch, but the reminder of his old life unsettles him. As Jimmy leaves court one day, Nacho suddenly appears and forces him into a car. He's taking Jimmy to meet Lalo. And while he pretends to be in control, the situation is beginning to spin out of his hands. Also, Mike's guilt is clearly weighing him down hard. Nacho brings Jimmy to Lalo, who wants him to handle Domingo's arrest. Lalo wants Domingo out of jail, but without him saying anything damaging. So Jimmy, as Saul, comes up with a plan that brings in DEA agents Hank Schrader and Steven Gomez. Even though the agents are suspicious, Saul negotiates a deal where Domingo gives up information on Gus's hidden money drop locations. In return, Domingo gets to go free and becomes a secret DEA informant. Jimmy realizes this won't be the last time Lalo uses him for shady legal work. Nacho tries to get his father out of danger by having someone buy his upholstery shop, hoping his dad can retire safely. But his father figures out the plan and rejects it, refusing to be pushed out of his business. Nacho also tells Gus about Lalo's plan to use Domingo as an informant. Gus decides not to interfere, since stopping it would reveal that he has a spy, Nacho, inside the Salamanca operation. Mike, still mourning Werner, continues to struggle. Kim, meanwhile, gets pulled away from her volunteer legal work to deal with a Mesa Verde case involving a stubborn old man who won't move off his land. At first, she demands he obey the court order, but later returns with a kind offer to help him relocate. However, the man sees through it and accuses her of pretending to care. Both Nacho and Kim are caught in no-win situations. Nacho is trapped between Gus and Lalo, and Kim is realizing that working for a powerful bank doesn't align with her values. Even when she tries to be kind, it backfires. Jimmy has lunch with Howard, who offers him a job at the law firm HHM. But instead of being happy, Jimmy is weirded out by the offer. Later, in secret, he throws 3 bowling balls at Howard's expensive car, smashing it up. The license plate on the car reads, Name-Ass 3, which makes it extra noticeable. Meanwhile, Kim tries to talk Mesa Verde out of kicking out Mr. Acker from his home. She proposes a new plan that keeps his house, but Kevin, the bank's head, refuses. Kim then brings in Jimmy, acting as Saul Goodman, to legally fight for Acker against the bank. In the drug world, Gus teams up with Victor and Diego to make sure the DEA finds the stash spots that Domingo revealed earlier. This way, Gus controls what the cops find. Elsewhere, Mike's daughter-in-law, Stacy, tells him she's not ready to let him babysit Kaylee, which hurts him emotionally. Later that night, Mike gets attacked and stabbed by local gang members. He blacks out and wakes up in a mysterious village. It turns out Mike is in a quiet ranch in Mexico tied to Gus. There's even a fountain honoring Max, Gus's old friend or partner. Dr. Barry Goodman is there too and tells Mike he needs to stay and rest. Gus visits Mike and asks him to help in his ongoing war against the Salamancas. Mike says he's not interested in killing, just to help Gus get ahead. But Gus counters that Mike understands revenge, implying their goals are similar. Jimmy, now working as Saul, stalls the eviction case against Acker. Kim tries to step away from the case by saying there's a conflict of interest, but Kevin doesn't buy it and wants her to stay. Meanwhile, Howard again tries to get Jimmy to join HHM, and Jimmy lies, saying he's thinking it over. Jimmy tells Kim their best option now is to find some dirt on Kevin. Kim doesn't back down. Jimmy hires Sobchak, a shady guy, to sneak around Kevin's home and gather any dirt. Sobchak finds nothing obviously damaging, but when Kim looks through the photos, she notices something important and smiles. Later, Kim's boss, Rich, suggests that she's not fully committed to Mesa Verde's case and should quit it. Kim gets defensive and refuses to back down. Kim is clearly torn. She wants to do the right thing, but she also can't resist the rush of bending rules with Jimmy. Meanwhile, Jimmy's war with Howard shows how much resentment he still carries. Kim tells Jimmy that she doesn't want to blackmail Kevin after all. Instead, she wants to settle the situation fairly between the bank and Mr. Acker. Jimmy agrees, but at the official meeting, he surprises everyone by asking Kevin to pay $4 million. Kim is furious, but doesn't stop him. Kim had realized something from Sobchak's photos. Mesa Verde's logo came from a photo the bank never legally got permission to use. Jimmy uses that information to scare Kevin. He threatens to take Mesa Verde to court over the copyright and says he'll run TV ads portraying Kevin's dad, the bank's founder, in a bad light. Kevin realizes Jimmy is serious and agrees to pay both Acker and the photographer, whose photo they used illegally. After the deal, Kim confronts Jimmy angrily. She feels like he tricked her and made her look like the naive one during the meeting. Jimmy doesn't deny it, but instead of walking away, Kim suggests they get married, maybe to make sure they can't be forced to testify against each other. Kim and Jimmy's relationship reaches a strange new level, twisted love mixed with criminal strategy. Meanwhile, Gus, Victor, and Mike meet with Nacho. Nacho reveals that Lalo plans to tip off the DEA about Gus's street dealers. To protect himself, Gus tells Victor to let some low-level guys take the fall, but make sure it can't be traced back to him. Mike takes matters into his own hands. He gives the police a tip pointing to Lalo's role in killing Fred, the guy who worked at the money wire store. The police track down Lalo while he's out driving, ready to arrest him. Jimmy and Kim get married so they can legally keep their conversations private, using spousal privilege. Lalo, under a fake name, is charged with murder and hires Saul to get him out on bail. Kim and her boss, Rich, apologize to Kevin for how the Everett Acker case turned out. Kevin says he'll think about whether to keep them as legal counsel. Later, when Kim and Rich visit again, Kim reminds Kevin that he ignored their advice throughout the case. She says that no matter who his lawyer is in the future, she hopes he'll be willing to listen. Kevin seems to agree. Meanwhile, Mike tells Stacy that he's feeling better and is no longer angry like before. Nacho tells Mike that Lalo wants him to burn down one of Gus Fring's restaurants. Gus gathers the owners of his side businesses to give a report to Peter, the CEO of Madrigal, and updates him and Lydia on the secret meth lab's progress. To protect Nacho's cover as a spy, Gus and Nacho actually burn down a Los Pollos Hermanos location. Saul uses information from Mike to help Lalo in court, arguing that the police faked evidence. The judge sets bail at $7 million, which Lalo says he can pay. Howard approaches Jimmy and takes back his job offer. Jimmy gets angry, blames Howard for Chuck's death, and says he's too powerful now, as Saul Goodman, to be stuck in a firm like HHM. This shows Jimmy going deeper into his Saul Goodman identity, while Kim takes steps toward independence. Lalo continues to be a dangerous wildcard, and Mike works quietly behind the scenes to manage the chaos. The cousins go to a cartel hideout in Mexico to pick up Lalo's $7 million bail money. Someone secretly calls to report seeing them. Lalo gives Jimmy the job of picking up the cash from a remote location and offers him $100,000 for it. Kim is worried and says Jimmy is a lawyer, not a drug dealer's delivery man. But Jimmy says the job should be simple. The cousins hand Jimmy the 2 heavy bags full of cash and drive away. On the way back, Jimmy is stopped by gunmen who steal the money and are about to kill him. Suddenly, a hidden sniper opens fire and kills all but one of the attackers. The shooter is Mike, who had been keeping watch. Mike takes Jimmy and the money with him. When Jimmy's car breaks down, they push it off the road and start walking through the desert to stay hidden. They camp overnight and continue their hike the next day. Meanwhile, Kim gets nervous when Jimmy doesn't return and asks Lalo for his whereabouts, but Lalo refuses to help. As the lone surviving gunman continues searching, Jimmy distracts him and Mike shoots him dead. The bad guy's truck flips and burns. Jimmy and Mike keep walking. These episodes mark a turning point for Jimmy. He's no longer just bending the law, but physically walking into cartel territory. Kim's concern grows, and Mike continues to play the fixer in Gus's drug empire. Jimmy and Mike finally reach a gas station where they're picked up by Tyrus and Victor. Jimmy delivers Lalo's bail money and claims he was alone and had to walk after his car broke down. Lalo plans to flee to Mexico, thinking all is well. But Gus realizes that the ambush was actually set up by Juan Bolsa, another cartel member, to protect Gus's interests. Jimmy lies to Kim about what happened in the desert, but she figures it out when she sees a bullet hole in his travel mug. Kim decides to quit her job at Schweikart and Coakley so she can focus on helping people with pro bono legal work. Mike tells Jimmy that the nightmares from what he went through will fade in time. Meanwhile, Lalo discovers Jimmy's wrecked car in the desert, which makes him suspicious. Instead of going to Mexico, he secretly returns to Albuquerque. Mike warns Jimmy just before Lalo arrives at Kim's apartment. From a nearby rooftop, Mike sets up a sniper rifle and waits. Lalo starts questioning Jimmy about the desert trip, making him tell the whole story again. Then he asks about the bullet holes in Jimmy's car. Kim steps in and says the car was probably trashed by random people after Jimmy left it. She scolds Lalo for not trusting Jimmy. Lalo seems to believe her, then leaves. He tells Nacho they'll go to Mexico, but not to the original pickup spot. Lalo's calm, polite demeanor hides how dangerous he is, and now both Kim and Jimmy are directly in his path. Kim's boldness saves them for now, but the tension is rising fast. After Lalo leaves their apartment, Jimmy finally tells Kim the full truth about what happened in the desert with Mike. Realizing they could still be in danger, Jimmy and Kim hide out in a hotel in downtown Albuquerque. Meanwhile, Mike informs Gus that Lalo and Nacho are currently at Lalo's family home in Chihuahua, Mexico. Gus decides to take this opportunity to have Lalo killed and says Nacho can assist the assassins by opening a gate for them. Back in Albuquerque, Kim agrees to take on 20 criminal cases for the public defender's office for free. Nacho gets a phone call telling him to open Lalo's back gate at 3 a.m. as part of the plan to let the killers in. Meanwhile, Kim meets Howard at the courthouse and tells him that she has quit working at Schweikart and Coakley. Howard warns her about Jimmy's recent strange and aggressive behavior, like damaging Howard's car and throwing bowling balls at it. He suggests that Kim is being influenced too much by Jimmy. Kim is offended and pushes back, saying she's perfectly capable of making her own decisions and doesn't need anyone to speak for her. Later, Mike tells Jimmy that Gus has ordered Lalo to be killed. Jimmy shares this news with Kim, and they start to talk about their financial future. They decide that if they can ruin Howard's reputation, it might push a faster settlement in the Sandpiper case, which would earn Jimmy his large payday sooner. Jimmy and Kim are now fully committed to a morally gray path, both professionally and personally. Their partnership is growing stronger, but it's built on lies, schemes, and now even criminal manipulation. Meanwhile, in Mexico, Lalo takes Nacho to meet Don Eladio, the boss of the cartel. Don Eladio listens to Nacho's plans to take over Salamanca business operations and gives his approval. Later that night, as instructed, Nacho opens the back gate to Lalo's home, allowing the hired assassins to enter. As soon as he does, Nacho escapes into the darkness. But the hit doesn't go as planned. Lalo quickly realizes what's happening and defends himself. In a brutal fight, Lalo manages to kill all of the assassins, except one. Instead of killing the final hitman, Lalo forces him to cooperate. He instructs the injured assassin to make a phone call to the middleman who organized the hit and report that the mission was successful and that Lalo Salamanca is dead. Lalo turning the tables on the assassins is a major twist. While everyone thinks he's dead, he's very much alive, and now he knows someone close to him betrayed him. That spells serious danger for Nacho and anyone else caught in the crossfire.
Better call Saul.
All right. Better call Saul.
Season 6. After escaping Lalo Salamanca's compound in Mexico, Nacho Varga hides out in a shabby motel in Chihuahua. He gets a call from Gus Fring's man, Tyrus, who tells him that Lalo is dead, but the truth is, Lalo survived. Lalo sneaks to a house where a woman named Sylvia lives. He forces her husband, Mateo, to shave his beard and look like him. Then, Lalo kills both Sylvia and Mateo. He burns Mateo's body and leaves it at the remains of his old compound, tricking the cartel into thinking he died in the fire. Even the cousins are fooled. Meanwhile, Gus hears there's a bounty on Nacho's head. Although everyone thinks Lalo is dead, Gus suspects Lalo faked his death. Back in Albuquerque, Jimmy and Kim continue their plan to ruin Howard Hamlin's name, so the Sandpiper lawsuit settles faster. Over dinner, Kim comes up with a new trick. The next day, Jimmy sneaks into Howard's country club and plants fake cocaine in Howard's locker. When Howard finds it, Cliff Main sees it too and starts to think Howard is using drugs. At the border, Lalo plans to sneak back into Mexico with a group of immigrants. But first, he calls his uncle, Hector, and tells him he's alive and wants to kill Gus. After that, Lalo changes his mind and starts planning something else. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Kim try to hurt Howard's reputation more by going to the Kettlemans, a couple running a shady tax service. Jimmy tells them Howard was on drugs during their case, which caused Craig Kettleman to go to jail. The Kettlemans don't hire Jimmy, but they spread the rumor to Cliff Main. making Howard look worse. Elsewhere, Mike breaks into Nacho's home and takes the contents of his safe, including fake IDs and cash. He replaces them with fake evidence and leaves a phone number. Gus's rival, Juan Bolsa, uses that number to track Nacho to his motel. Nacho sees someone spying on him and realizes Gus set him up. The cousins arrive to capture him, but Nacho escapes and hides in an auto shop. He calls Gus and agrees to surrender, but only if Gus promises his father will be safe. Back in Albuquerque, a prosecutor tells Kim that Jorge de Guzman's real name is Lalo Salamanca and that he supposedly died in Mexico. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Kim move forward with their plan. They steal Howard's car keys with help from Huel and plan to stage a fake scene. That night, Kim tells Jimmy that Lalo is dead. Nacho is taken back to New Mexico, where he meets Gus and Mike. They plan for Nacho to blame the attack on Lalo on a fake Peruvian cartel. At a staged meeting in the desert, Nacho is tied up and starts the lie, but then changes course. He boldly confesses that he tried to kill Hector and insults the entire Salamanca family. Then, in a shocking twist, he grabs a gun and kills himself, choosing to die on his own terms. Later, Howard visits his therapist, unaware Jimmy, dressed as him, is using his Jaguar in another scam. Jimmy picks up a prostitute, Wendy, and stages a scene where he throws her out of the car in front of Cliff, who thinks Howard has lost control. Jimmy's fellow lawyers soon start avoiding him, after learning he helped Lalo get bail under a fake name. But criminals start lining up to hire him, calling him Salamanca's guy. Kim, meanwhile, notices a car following her. She confronts the men, who drive away. The next day, Mike tells her they were his men, there to protect her and Jimmy because Lalo is still alive. Eventually, Jimmy is kicked out of the nail salon because it's too full of clients. He and Kim find a new, bigger office, and he hires Francesca Liddy again as his secretary. Gus returns to his heavily guarded home, insisting on continued surveillance despite Mike's concern about being stretched thin. At Sandpiper, Howard tells clients to be patient for a better deal. But Cliff confronts him about his strange behavior, and Howard starts to see that Jimmy is behind it all. Kim meets her old assistant Viola and learns the Sandpiper mediation will be handled by a man named Rand Casimiro. That night, Jimmy goes to a boxing gym where Howard challenges him to a fight. Howard knocks Jimmy down, and Jimmy leaves, not knowing that Howard's private investigator is now secretly watching him. Gus and Mike visit the underground meth lab site, where Gus secretly hides a gun in case of an attack. Meanwhile, in Germany, Lalo poses as Ben and befriends Werner Ziegler's widow, Margaret. He learns Werner died during a secretive project, and none of his crew attended the funeral. Sneaking into her house, Lalo finds a lucite block with a construction company logo, a clue to Gus's operation. Back in Albuquerque, Howard's PI shows him photos of Jimmy withdrawing $20,000. Kim is invited to a major luncheon on the same day as their big plan, D-Day. Lalo later ambushes Casper for answers. On the day of their big con, known as D-Day, Jimmy and Kim go their separate ways. Jimmy buys a bottle of Zafiro Añejo to celebrate their expected success, but is shocked to spot the real Rand Casimiro at a store with a cast on his arm. Their impersonator, who appears in staged photos for the scam, doesn't have a cast, which could ruin everything. Jimmy quickly calls Kim, who ditches a major luncheon and races back to Albuquerque. Together, they retake the photos, using their fake Casimiro, and hand them to Howard's private investigator, who's secretly working with them. During the Sandpiper mediation, Howard accuses Casimiro of being involved in shady dealings with Jimmy, but when everyone examines the photos, they only show Jimmy innocently tossing a frisbee, not handing over an envelope. Howard looks paranoid and unhinged. The meeting is paused, and the case settles quickly, just as Jimmy and Kim had planned. Meanwhile, Lalo Salamanca hides in a storm drain near Gus Fring's laundry facility. He calls his uncle Hector, knowing the line is tapped, and lies, saying he'll kill Gus that night. While Jimmy and Kim celebrate their victory at home, Howard unexpectedly shows up, furious and confused about being sabotaged. The mood quickly turns horrifying when Lalo bursts in and shoots Howard in the head. Jimmy and Kim are stunned. The night goes from triumph to tragedy in seconds. Lalo hands Jimmy an address and tells him to kill whoever opens the door. Jimmy, terrified, convinces Lalo to send Kim instead. She drives to the address, Gus's house, but is intercepted by Mike and his men. Mike figures out Lalo's true intentions and rushes to warn Gus. Lalo sneaks into the laundry, ambushes Gus and his guards, and forces Gus to record a humiliating video for Don Eladio. He demands Gus open the entrance to the underground lab. Inside, Lalo asks for Gus's final words. Instead of pleading, Gus lashes out at the Salamancas, then shuts off the lights, grabs a hidden gun, and shoots Lalo dead. The next morning, Mike explains to a shaken Jimmy and Kim that Howard's death will be made to look like a drug-induced suicide. Mike and his crew clean Kim's apartment and bury Howard and Lalo under the meth lab. Meanwhile, Gus meets Don Eladio and other cartel members. Hector claims Lalo tried to kill Gus, but with no evidence, he's dismissed. Later, Mike visits Nacho's father and tells him about Nacho's death. When Mike promises justice, Nacho's father bitterly calls it revenge. At Howard's memorial, Cheryl accuses Jimmy and Kim of foul play. Kim lies, saying she saw Howard using drugs. The next day, overwhelmed, Kim leaves Jimmy and files for divorce. In a flash forward, Jimmy has fully become Saul Goodman, living a flashy life devoid of morals. By 2010, hiding as Gene Tekovic, he manipulates a kind elderly woman named Marion by pretending to help her. He soon discovers she's Jeff, the cab driver's mother. Gene pressures Jeff into helping him commit a mall heist. The plan works, but Gene reveals it was all blackmail. He now controls Jeff and Buddy. On November 12th, Gene calls Francesca to learn what's happened in Albuquerque. She tells him most of their associates are either in jail or gone, and that Kim had called just to check on him. After his call with Kim ends badly, Gene, Saul Goodman's new identity, returns to crime. He gets Jeff, a cab driver, to work night shifts so they can target drunk passengers. Gene spikes their water with drugs, and once they pass out, Jeff's friend Buddy sneaks into their homes to photograph their IDs and credit cards. Everything goes smoothly until Gene targets a man with cancer. Buddy refuses, explaining his father had cancer, and walks away. Gene coldly fires him and carries out the burglary himself, showing how far he's fallen morally. Meanwhile, Kim is living a quiet life in Florida, working at a sprinkler company and dating a man named Glenn. Gene's call rattles her. She flies to Albuquerque, visits the courthouse, and confesses to Howard Hamlin's widow, Cheryl. She hands Cheryl an affidavit explaining the truth about Howard's death and her role in the scam with Jimmy. Although Kim likely won't be prosecuted due to lack of evidence, the emotional weight is too much. On the bus ride home, she breaks down in tears. While Gene robs the cancer patient's home, Jeff panics when a police car parks behind his cab. Though the officers are just eating lunch, Jeff speeds off and crashes into another car. He's arrested and from jail calls Gene, who promises to call Marion, Jeff's mother, and bail him out the next day. But Gene slips up while talking to Marion, revealing legal knowledge he shouldn't have. Suspicious, Marion uses a computer Jeff bought her and discovers Gene's true identity through old Saul Goodman commercials. When Gene arrives at her house, she triggers her life alert and calls the police. Gene flees, but is soon caught hiding in a dumpster. Back in custody, Gene reverts to his old persona, Saul Goodman. He contacts Bill Oakley and persuades him to act as his legal advisor. Saul meets with federal prosecutors and even invites Hank Schrader's widow, Marie, to the room. He pretends remorse, claiming he helped Walter White only out of fear. His act nearly works. He negotiates a reduced sentence of 7 years in a minimum security prison. But he later changes course, publicly admits his crimes, takes responsibility for helping Walt, and confesses guilt about Chuck's death. He calls himself Jimmy McGill again. Jimmy is sentenced to 86 years but earns respect in prison. One day, Kim visits him. They quietly share a cigarette in a cell. As she leaves, Jimmy gives her a finger gun gesture, a final silent connection.